My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. Well, we're back to the Ren and Stimpy games yet again. Thankfully, this is the second last entry in the series. Fire Dogs was released in June of 1994 for the Super Nintendo. At this point, surely the shelves of stores with a Super Nintendo section were just packed with Ren and Stimpy games. We had a brand new developer at the helm here, and one I actually recognise and have some respect for. Argonaut Games developed Fire Dogs, and they have a special place in my heart because they would go on to develop both of the Croc games. They were a massive part of my childhood. Besides that, Argonaut genuinely brought some serious development pedigree to the table, something we haven't really seen so far in Nickelodeon video game history. They were heavily involved in the development of the original Star Fox game, which was released about a year earlier. In the following years, they'd get into licensed games heavily, making games based on The Emperor's New Groove, Aladdin, Bionicle, the awful Catwoman movie, and Harry Potter. Yes, they're the ones responsible for PS1 Hagrid. Critically, this game has a 6.2 average review score, but as I've constantly said, using review scores for these older games is pretty useless. Almost every game I've reviewed so far in this series has had roughly the same review score, but the quality of all these games couldn't be more different. If anybody can finally turn out another decent Ren and Stimpy game, it would be Argonaut. So let's dive in and see what Fire Dogs is all about. As any major fan of Ren and Stimpy would recognise, this game is specifically based on the episode of the same name. Developers were really obsessed with somehow turning episodes of this insane show into video games. For Cartoon Network, developers usually came up with their own premise, but I guess this is easier considering all of the design stuff has already been done for you. Everything about Fire Dogs revolves around being a fireman. When you first start the game, you're dropped into a firehouse without a single hint to what is going on. Stimpy's just prancing along, and up the top there's a timer ominously ticking down. After you fumble around for a bit, you'll discover that your goal is to collect 8 different firefighting items strewn around the level. As you do this, you'll be going up and down levels, dodging various hazards, and trying to stay away from this big hunk of a fireman who wants to kill you for some reason. It's very much a similar formula to Elevator Action, or Dexter's Lab Robot Rampage for those of you who are cultured. Just look at Stimpy grinding on that pole.
I want you to park that Big Mac truck right in this little garage.
Not only is it weird that this fireman wants to kill you, but if he bonks you on the head once, you're dead instantly. You'd think it would be easy to avoid him even though he can kill you in one hit because there's only one of him per level. You'd be wrong though. Once his AI detects where you are, he will follow you to the end of the earth to murder your ass. He's like some kind of non-giving up fire guy. Protecting yourself from this Terminator-like man is a mystery at first. Seemingly all Stimpy can do is run, pick up items, and jump. However, throughout levels you'll find 2 sets of randomly placed items that will help immensely. The first of which, and easily the most helpful and vital item in the game, is the Dalmatian paint. By finding this, Stimpy will paint himself to look like a Dalmatian. Once painted, the fireman will leave you alone. The game doesn't just become extremely simple once you apply the paint though. There are numerous sprinklers around levels that will wash your paint off. Often you can just wait for these to turn off and then proceed, but if you're impatient, or you get your timing wrong, or the timer in the level is just ticking down, you'll slowly see it start to fade. The other helpful item is the fire extinguisher. This mostly exists to put out the ridiculous amount of fires found throughout the level. What kind of terrible fire station are these guys running? It's literally burning to the ground and the fireman is ignoring it. In addition to its use for the fires, the extinguisher can be sprayed on your stalker enemy to freeze him momentarily. This is only a minor help. While it does freeze him, I found that it was never long enough for you to actually get away, coupled with the extinguisher having very limited use before running out, and it's mostly useless. Later levels introduce a few new hazards, such as the icy floors, which you have to equip the boots you collect to travel over them without slipping about. There's also this weird rain cloud that slows you down, but really doesn't affect you at all. At first glance, the basic core gameplay in Fire Dogs isn't too bad. Like I said, it's basically just the same formula as Elevator Action. However, you'll quickly notice some glaring issues. The first issue is how repetitive this section of the game is. Fire Dogs is divided into 5 different days. You quite literally play through a Monday to Friday work week. Every single one of these levels you play through is exactly the same. Sure, the layout changes a bit and the size is slightly increased, as well as the extra hazards, but for the most part all of the levels feel identical. Honestly, the size difference between the first and last Firehouse didn't feel all that significant. It just becomes so incredibly repetitive to play. Another issue I had with the game was the basic premise. In Dexter's Lab Robot Rampage, you needed to collect a bunch of items in the same format. However, there was no time limit and you didn't have to do it all in a single life. In Fire Dogs, you have an extremely tight time limit to collect all 8 items, and if you die, you're sent back to square one. This is a major issue when the one enemy in the game can kill you in a single hit. Technically, you don't have to get all items at once. You can actually return to the fire truck and place the items there, and if you die, they'll still be on the truck. Placing the items on the truck is actually the end goal, something I found out the hard way when I collected all 8 items but had time expire on me. However, the game is clearly not designed to be played like this. The devs definitely want you to collect all 8 items in one go. The ridiculously tight time limit means you can't afford to go back and forth from the truck multiple times, and seeing as you don't have many lives to play with, it would be foolish to do this. Honestly, the time limit is fucking ridiculous. The fact that the devs looked at it and thought it was acceptable is mind-blowing. Your run through the level needs to be almost 100% perfectly optimized to collect everything without running out of time, something that can only be achieved by playing through the level half a dozen times. Another thing that makes the time limit even more impossible is the controls for walking up and down stairs. For something so basic, trying to traverse the stairs is legitimately the hardest part of Fire Dogs. Walking upstairs is touchy, but I quickly discovered you can just hold up. Holding up will actually make you walk along just as left or right would, and if you come to a set of stairs, you'll automatically walk up them. However, this doesn't work the same way for going downstairs. You see, if you've already been walking along for a few paces, you can hold down to walk along and traverse stairs in the same way. However, the problems really start when you're in a tight space. Every level features at least one small room you have to go in to get an item. These small rooms don't allow you to build up enough momentum in order to go down the stairs. Simply pressing down while standing still doesn't work because it makes Stimpy duck. So what ensues in this situation is you desperately mashing the D-pad, trying something, anything that will make these fucking stairs work. I have quite literally no idea how it works in these situations. I would be doing the same thing over and over again for minutes at a time, only for it to suddenly work on my 50th attempt. Because of this, the game becomes damn near unplayable. The god-awful time limit means you can't afford to ever get stuck like this. If there was no time limit, it would still be a huge pain in the ass, but it would be playable. I'm not the only one who's had major issues with these stairs either. The Angry Video Game Nerd has reviewed this game too and had the exact same problem. Nothing I could find online mentioned how to tackle these stairs easier, so I was basically screwed. I wasn't even going to be able to progress through levels because I'd always get stuck in these tight rooms. This is when I decided to do a little modding of Fire Dogs. I thankfully was able to find an action replay code that removed the time limit. Holy shit, did this make the game so much more enjoyable. Yeah, going downstairs was still a nightmare, but I was no longer ripping my hair out because it was wasting precious time. I think the time limit might have been slightly bearable if it wasn't for those controls, but we'll honestly never know for sure. Another major issue with these levels stems from the fact that paint cans and fire extinguishers, the only thing in the game that allow you to defend yourself, are randomly placed throughout the levels. Their placements change every time you die, and this causes massive issues. If the RNG isn't on your side, you may as well just kill Stimpy and start over, because you can't navigate levels without at least one of them. In particular, Stimpy should really start each level painted as a Dalmatian. The paint gets slowly removed by the sprinklers, so there would still be some challenge. Without the paint, or even the fire extinguisher, it's basically game over as soon as the firefighter spots you. You can try and run, but 99% of the time it's in vain. The icing on the cake was when the game's level design quite literally left me trapped with no way to progress. Like I mentioned earlier, you're sent skidding over these ice sections unless you're wearing the boots, an item you must discover throughout the level. Just slipping your way over these sections isn't too bad most of the time. It honestly doesn't have much of an impact, and often the ice is used to prevent you from going to areas before you grab the boots. Well, there's one particular section that throws this out of the window. I slid down a pole into a new section, explored that section, and then tried to return up that pole, only to discover I couldn't because the base of the pole was surrounded by ice. I hadn't found the boots yet, so I was just stuck here. It's terrible level design from Argonaut, especially because this section is found right near the start of the level. The Firehouse, elevator action style gameplay isn't the only thing offered in Fire Dogs though. After you complete each of those sections, you're taken to the on-the-job portion of the game. This sees Ren and Stimpy hurtling away on a fire truck to a level where you have to catch items that are falling out of buildings. The objective here is that you need to catch all of the items within a tight time limit. This game is just obsessed with time limits. You quite literally need to catch every item within the time. If you mess up, the game restarts that individual sequence until you get it absolutely spot on. The whole thing is tedious and dull, and even with the insane time limit removed, it's still not even remotely fun. Once you trudge through this section, you move to the next day and start traversing the firehouse again. Once you beat the firehouse section again, you go back to just catching stuff from buildings. Essentially, this entire game just has 2 levels. Yeah, there are minor changes as you progress through the week, but they are so minor that you might as well have just copied and pasted the first levels 5 times over. Argonaut really created 2 unique levels and thought, that's a wrap, boys. The on-the-job sections become ridiculously hard when they start throwing in hazards, like anvils and bowling balls, which you have to dodge. It's almost impossible to avoid these your first time. There's often not enough time for you to react and get out of the way. The way to actually succeed in those situations is to have pre-existing knowledge of the patterns. It's just not fun. It got to the point where I was just using the level select password to skip over these sections. They're dull and so tedious to play through. I have no idea how anybody would complete these with a time limit, because it was taking me an eternity to catch every single item. From a presentation standpoint, the soundtrack is similarly lazy and low effort. There is 1 song for the fire station levels and 1 song for the on-the-job levels. That's it. One of the songs is also literally just the William Tell overture, so in reality, they made 1 fucking song for this game. Everything about this game just screams lazy. I will admit that while it isn't the most beautiful Ren and Stimpy game we've seen, I think the visuals and art style match the show pretty well. But when you only have to design 2 levels, that should be pretty easy to achieve. Don't play this game. If you mod this game to remove the time limit and make Stimpy start each level with the Dalmatian paint, Fire Dogs actually becomes okay, but I'd argue it's not worth the effort. There are really only 2 unique levels in this entire game, so I'd say jumping through those hoops to make it playable isn't worth it. I shudder at the thought of playing this on an actual SNES. It would have been downright unplayable. It's a shame that Argonaut seems to have put as little effort as possible into this, because at the heart of it, there's a few nuggets of good ideas that could have been expanded into a really fun game. I actually kind of enjoyed the Stimpy levels, especially once the time limit was removed, but the repetitive levels, awful stair controls, and unrealistic time limit are a negative factor that are way too big to be ignored. When you combine those major issues with the fact that Argonaut seems to have deliberately put as little effort into this game as possible, well, you're left with a pretty big disaster. Next time, we'll thankfully be reviewing something that isn't a Ren and Stimpy game. After kickstarting their video game history by adapting one of their game shows, Nickelodeon are returning to this idea for Guts. Double Dare was majorly flawed, largely because the game show it was based on just wasn't a good fit for an NES game. Will Guts make the jump to video games smoothly? Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out.